never been on an agenda with so many speakers who are like-minded, and that's really thrilling. Where I'm different is I'm older than everybody else, I'm crankier, and I'm more impatient. So I also don't do PowerPoint, so with great respect to the TED-like conference, I don't do that. I don't know how to make those things pop out and in. I don't text, I don't do any of those cool things, but I have a wonderful staff who does all those things. But let me start with a memory clue, okay? We are the only developed Western country with 23% of our children who live in poverty. That's staggering. I mean, it's staggering to me, and I lose sleep over that because I've been working in poverty communities on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in Bogota, Colombia, in South America, and I think I've come to believe three things as a teacher. And I believe that once you're a teacher, you're always a teacher. You can call me an administrator, you can call me anything you want. I'm a teacher. That's what I do, that's what I love, that's my passion. And I've come to believe three things. First of all children can overcome factors of heredity and environment to learn the tools they need, get the tools they need to be successful. All children. I could give you stories of the most dysfunctional families, the most horrific incidences of poverty, and show you stars because of protective factors and their resiliency and all the good things that have happened in programs that have supported these children. Second thing, poverty is not an excuse for low test scores, any more than low test scores can be an explanation for poverty. You know, just think about the PhDs and the breadlines in the Depression. I'm guessing none of those guys or women ever scored far below basic in any test, but they lived in poverty. All of this isn't to say that a culture of poverty shouldn't be thought about in terms of our responses to education. Of course it has to be. But it also has to be responded to pragmatically and thoughtfully, and not with easy solutions, and not because a billionaire who knows best says so. I really feel, in so many ways, that every person who has spoken today and everybody in this room understands that there are economically poor kids who really stay in school because of the after-school program that they go to. And I'm going to call it after school because it's a habit. I've done it for years. I totally embrace expanded learning. I love the fact that California has galvanized around that, but I still don't think there's a shared vision for what that is. When I say after school, I mean before school, I mean summer, I mean supplemental learning, I mean all that stuff. But I mean out of the regular school day, beyond the bell. So that's essentially what I'm talking about. But I really want to talk about what's happening in this movement. And I want to really talk about what all this has to do with research, and from my opinion. I have to say, I'm very, very pragmatic about research. I share the opinion of a researcher that I read about in the early 80s. I'm sure Bob would know who this guy is and when he wrote, I think it was 81 maybe, Jay Gould, who wrote The Mismeasure of Man, okay? And I'm going to borrow liberally from his work because I think it just stayed in my DNA. And what he said is that science moves forward just as much by critiquing the conclusions of others as by making novel discoveries. I've traveled all over the country, and I've seen lots of after-school programs, and I've read lots of research. Independent research, not independent research, in-house research. And frankly, I have seen too many fallacious arguments crediting after-school programs from everything from meteoric test score improvement to basically curing obesity. And I've seen data. And I have seen too much focus on a few remarkable outcomes of certain approaches rather than the countless failures within those same approaches. I absolutely, totally disagree with the notion of a demonstration site. I can show you a site today that is state-of-the-art It has everything going for it, the most cooperative learning, the most wonderful leadership, the most wonderful engagement of children. In a heartbeat, that can change. You have a change of a site coordinator, you have a change of a principal, you have a change of gang involvement in a particular community. And it's a cliche, but when you've seen one after-school program, you've seen one after-school program. There are so many factors involved. That's not to say that we don't need more reliable and valid research. But I'll tell you something. Programs that really buy into all the wonderful things you heard about today and all the rhetoric of this social, emotional learning and a balanced program of education, enrichment, and recreation are threatened today. And as progressive as the rhetoric is that you've heard in this room, there is an enormous threat to this continuance in terms of policy and funding. And I'll tell you why. I mean, obviously, I think we can all cite precedences for policies and fundings that have not terribly much been based on research. So it's not a lack of research that's most threatening these programs. I think we've heard it said in several different ways. What's most threatening these programs is flawed messaging that suggests, by some, that all students who are below basic and proficient in their academics in schools, as reflected by their test scores, need a primary focus of more academics after school. Here's the rhetoric that I hear. We do support that, but we inject art, music, cooperative learning, project-based learning into these academic subjects. You know what the real-life message is to kids? The real-life message in many, not often, I mean not always, but in many and too often, is sit down, shut up, and listen. That's what I see. I also see that having worked in the after-school delivery system since 1973, the first after-school program I worked with was as supervisor of daycare services in New Jersey. It was called Me Oh God, and it was in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. And this is what I know, and I know this. If we continue to push for more and still more academics, rather than striving to achieve a careful balance, and it's the balance to me that's the operative word, of social, emotional, and physical development for our children, we have lost our way. We've lost our way, regardless of what the rhetoric is, regardless of what new research tells us. The misguided reasoning on the other side, and I call it the other side, and I have my colleagues who say, please don't be adversarial, but I'm still calling it the other side. The misguided reasoning is that the more time you spend doing something, the better you get at it. Well, I'm here to tell you I could take ballet 2 hours a night, every single night, and I'd never be any good at it. I don't want to do it. I'm too old and too fat, and it's not going to happen. So, motivation, confidence, and will are essential to being successful. More of something doesn't guarantee the success of it. I have actually heard the contention that after-school programs like LA's Best, and if I'm defensive, I'm defensive, that really have stressed a balance of emotional, social, physical, and cognitive development are a thing of the past. That's a quote. It's been said that we can only help close the achievement gap if greater periods of time after school are spent in direct instruction. Some say that the after-school field really needs to professionalize itself with credentials. Wait, I'm not coming across. I died. Oh, but I'm so loud that it doesn't matter. Okay, so there are some who actually have said to me, I would fund your program with substantively more money if you would just guarantee that one credentialed teacher is a site coordinator at each site. That's not going to happen. I certainly agree that there are some wonderful academic focused programs and some charter schools who've demonstrated outstanding gains in test score results because of a greater focus of time after school on direct instruction. But the extrapolation from that more instruction is inherently better for all of our children, I believe, appeals to a very deep and insidious desire to reduce very complicated phenomena to quantifiable metrics. We got to resist that urge to reduce our kids to those kinds of numbers because it's easier but not better. Proponents of the need more time for academics approach basically advocate for redesigning the school day. Often, and I've seen this, the practice boils down to more time of the same design. You know, to me, if they truly want to design and redesign the school day, the answer is not to usurp after school time. The better answer is to spend less time doing such prescriptive work and free up valuable time within the regular school day. Paul Heckman has always said that balanced after-school programs create environments that have a clear impact upon a child's success or failure as students. Sure, we need to do a better job of documenting how after-school programs build all these students' abilities to write and speak about their thoughts and feelings, because we do that so well. I always say the kids of privilege feel entitled to their thoughts and feelings because they have grandmothers like me who always want to know what they're thinking and feeling. So many of our young children today live in homes with subsistence language. Get your sister ready. Go to the store, would you get me this, that? Because parents are so stressed and so busy, some just trying to hold down 3 jobs. There is no, how did you feel about school today? What do you think about this? So we have a lot to do so that politicians and donors and stakeholders understand the true value of a balanced after-school program and get so many of the concepts that you saw before you. But let me be clear about one thing. I'm not anti-testing, never have been. I'm just concerned about the addiction to test scores and the collateral damage that this mindset has caused in this country in my lifetime. The teacher bashing, the labeling, the unbalanced distribution of resources. And you know what's funny? At least as I remember, and those who study, education theory will know more than I do, but as I remember it, Binet, who developed the IQ test, had some real cautions about testing. And as I remember it, if only he had lived to address the concerns that are going on now, we would have had a lot of help. He said, and I quote, intelligence, and I guess this was what, 19-something, 19-oh-something, I don't know, 2, 3, 4. Intelligence, he said, is too complex to capture with a single number. It's not a scalable thing like height. Rather, a rough guide, and this is the rub, for a limited practical purpose. If accepted arbitrarily, Binet said, it may give place to illusions out of context. You gotta love that. His test was developed, the whole purpose of it, he was commissioned to develop this test as a guide for identifying children who need help. Isn't that what all tests should be? You know, we've gotten to the place in this country where some people think quantification is a god. It's not. Students are so highly variable on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. You can't use testing intelligence like testing Lipitor in the bathroom with controlled circumstances. The circumstances just aren't that controlled. So there's a lot at stake in this debate. If decision makers and private funders evaluate after-school programs based on their effect upon how do they move the needle in the regular school day for test scores above all else, balanced programs, and by balanced I mean those programs that give equal time to social, emotional, physical, and some spiritual development, they're going to lose their flexibility and their independence and their financial support, and that's huge. They're going to lose their balance. The entire system's going to lose its balance. I think you all know the hardest kids to reach after school are those who are having the hardest time in school. But so many of you do that every single day. those who advocate solely for more time on tasks, but let's pepper them with fun, in classroom settings during after-school hours, to me, are as short-sighted as the kids are shortchanged. It's our fault. Again, there have been some staggered successful efforts, but I think the problem is those of us who know better have not stated our case well enough. We get all confused over terms, and after-school programs that recognize the need for this balanced programming have not promoted our position as well as those with opposing views. They've promoted them very, very well. So how can we do better? I'm a person that is action-oriented. It's probably ADD, I don't know. I never had the label. They didn't use them then. But the bottom line is, I do know that the wonderful efforts that have been throughout the country at varying times to be able to bring this message together haven't coalesced, hasn't worked, hasn't moved the needle to the extent that it must. We need to speak with one voice, not 7 voices, in a way that captures our best thinking and our best policy. We got to make sure that that voice is heard by the right audiences and in the right ways. And to that end, we're building a national campaign. It's co-chaired by an LA's Best board member who happens to be a corporate marketing guru from Mattel and now some private company, and the Coalition for Children's Jennifer Peck. Let me tell you about what this campaign is doing and why we think it's so important. Doesn't have a name, doesn't have any standing. We just want to get it done. LA's Best has started this process by partnering with a strategic communications firm to research, gather opinions, develop a campaign plan. We're not stupid. We looked out there to see what communications firm did such a good job marketing charter schools. What communications firm did such a good job marketing KIPP? What communications firm did such a good job marketing Teach for America? And we put out an RFP. Several responded. We chose that one. What comes next depends on that process and how the current members of the people who've come together who believe this is important work to do can build a campaign with nationwide support by both participation and funding. The coalition, which is so loose, nothing formal, and hopefully it will be right out of business as soon as we get a message that can move and people can accept, consists of leaders from the After School Alliance, the National After School Association, and representatives from programs throughout the country who've been politically active, as well as state and national lobbyists in terms of a shared philosophical vision for after-school programs. We've only met in Sacramento and Los Angeles, by the way, at each member's own expense, to set, and they're not members, they're just participants, to set priorities and to weigh options and to brainstorm an actionable strategy. We need a clean message that resonates and that's going to work. I have to say that I have such pride in the fact that our governing board for LA's Best made the decision to completely fund this, and these firms are unbelievably expensive. But I don't have a budget line item for that. They agreed to take that out of the reserve, and that was a substantive cost. My hope is that when the final messaging comes out, and right now, this month, there will be focus groups with principals on both coasts to be able to run 4 different messages that basically speak to everything that we've talked about today, but in a consolidated transfer meaning way, to see which of those words from those 4 messages resonate and which don't. Which are the kinds of words that a principal can use, and then the next group will include superintendents and others. But we want to use that group with superintendents and others to give the final messaging as opposed to using their very, very rare time to go through all 4. We want to cull from the 4, get one, then before it's released to the field, run that through the superintendents and the local decision makers to see which messaging basically makes the most sense in terms of transferring meaning instantly. So what my hope is is that everybody here, once we move this message out, because that's really the work of this group, get this message out once we get it, for you to look at it. It'll only be in a month or two. Determine whether or not it makes sense to you, and then join this important campaign. It's not a campaign against anything. It's not. Rather, it's a campaign to protect those programs which have historically and philosophically promoted after-school activities in equal time to education, enrichment, recreation, and nutrition. Not as, well, we're really all about this, but just sometimes this. Only with a successful national campaign will programs like this be able to continue and be able to respond to those students who are unlikely, and there are those students, you know them, who are unlikely to thrive in a more rigorous academic focus setting after school. We do believe public education is for everyone, not just for children whose parents ask for it. We believe that varying environments are important, and we know that our approach is worth protecting. Here's what's at stake. And this is, as uncomfortable as it is to hear, and it's also uncomfortable to say, it's the truth. There are education reformers out there with good intentions who portray enrichment and the arts and social emotional development as nice to have. It's good for kids, but not essential and not as important as a real focus on reading, writing, language development, cognitive skills. But not for their own children. Not for their own children, ladies and gentlemen. It's a wonderful ad in the New York Times for a new private school in Soho or Chelsea or wherever it is, Avenues. And it listed all these wonderful, wonderful components of cooperative learning and social emotional responsive activities and all these extraordinary opportunities for children, opportunities that all children should be privileged to have. Jane, Bob, do you know what the tuition is there? I'm sure it's 45 plus, 45,000 a year. Economically poor children should have those same experiences. And some of those folks who have supported that school are the first to say that economically poor children need to spend their time catching up and learning to be good consumers and good employees, though they may not say that, while wealthier kids should spend their time building all of these social skills and character through varied experiential learning to lead rich, fulfilling lives. There's a dichotomy here. This is not who we are as a nation, as educators, as parents, as grandparents, as people. We're better than this. Our children deserve better. All children deserve better. And if we do this, if we live up to our responsibility, if we choose the best response, not the easiest response, not the most quantifiable response, but if we see all children as our children, at that moment and not before, we can honestly make the claim, we are educators. That's it.